A black father paid $9,000 for what everyone dismissed as a worthless piece of scrap metal abandoned in the desert. But when he finally forced open the sealed compartment concealed in the cargo hold of that forgotten Boeing 737, he uncovered $324 million in unmarked bills and a secret that influential people had kept buried for 30 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Arizona sun was brutal at 10 o'clock in the morning, scorching the fractured asphalt of the salvage auction lot until heat waves rippled like phantoms across the desert landscape. Marcus Wellington stood beneath the only sliver of shade he could locate. A corroded awning that appeared ready to crumble if the breeze strengthened. Sweat trickled down his temples, and he brushed it away with the back of his hand. The same hand that carried the permanent marks of hydraulic fluid and engine grease. No amount of washing could erase. He was 34 years old, a widower, and the father of an 8-year-old son named Louis, who was currently sitting in summer camp 40 miles away. Completely unaware that his father was about to make the most reckless financial decision of his life. Marcus had exactly $9,200 in his checking account. That money represented 3 years of overtime shifts at Desert Air Maintenance. 3 years of missed meals and thrift store clothing, 3 years of telling Louis they couldn't afford karate lessons or the field trip to the Grand Canyon. The auctioneer, a sun-worn man named Hank, with a voice like sandpaper, stood on a makeshift platform built from shipping pallets. He scanned the thin crowd with the weary expression of someone who understood nobody here had serious money. There were maybe 20 people spread across the lot. Scrap dealers hunting for aluminum, mechanics searching for parts, and a handful of optimists still convinced they could strike gold in other people's refuse. Marcus didn't know which category he belonged to anymore. The lot was packed with the carcasses of aviation history. Cessnas with absent wings sat beside strip Pipers. A 1968 Beechcraft tilted at an angle, its landing gear long since harvested for parts. But Marcus wasn't here for any of those. His focus was locked on the object at the distant end of the lot, partially concealed behind a row of storage containers and a chain-link fence crowned with razor wire. It was a Boeing 737. Not a fragment of one, not a fuselage section or a wing assembly. An entire aircraft intact, resting on what appeared to be its original landing gear. Engine still mounted. The paint was bleached, the windows dark and vacant like hollow eyes, but it was complete. Marcus had spotted it 3 weeks ago when he'd driven past the salvage yard on his way to pick up Louis from school. He'd nearly swerved off the road. Nobody just left behind a 737. These aircraft were worth millions, even as parts. The engines alone could bring hundreds of thousands. The avionics, the landing gear, the hydraulics, every system could be salvaged, restored, resold. Yet here it sat gathering dust in the Arizona desert like a discarded plaything. He'd made some calls, discreet inquiries to contacts in the industry. What he discovered made no sense. The aircraft had been sitting here for almost 15 years. The documentation was a disaster. Ownership contested. Liens layered on liens. The salvage yard had obtained it in 2008 during a bankruptcy auction, and it had been sitting here ever since because nobody could settle on who actually owned it or what could legally be done with it until now. Apparently, the legal battles had finally been resolved. The salvage yard had clean title, and they wanted it removed. Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from his mother. Louis wants to know if you can pick him up early. Says he has a stomachache, but I think he's just restless. Marcus typed back quickly. Can you keep him another hour? Almost done here. He felt the familiar guilt knot in his chest. He was always requesting another hour, another favor, another compromise. Louis deserved better than a father who was constantly juggling, constantly behind, constantly choosing between being present and covering the bills. That's what made this gamble feel both dangerous and essential. If he could make this work, if he could somehow transform this aircraft into profit, maybe he could finally give Louis the security he deserved. Maybe he could stop living paycheck to paycheck, emergency to emergency, worry to worry. Hank's voice sliced through his thoughts. All right, folks. Let's get moving. We've got a lot to cover today. Next item is lot number 47, Boeing 737, Model Series 300, manufactured 1982. Airframe hours unknown. Engines attached but inoperative. Avionics stripped. Interior partially removed. Sold as is, where is, no warranties, no guarantees. Buyer responsible for all removal costs and transportation. He paused, squinting at his clipboard. Now, I'm going to level with you. This bird's been sitting here longer than my last marriage lasted. We got clear title as of last month, but there's conditions. Buyer's got to move it within 90 days or ownership reverts back to us. Also, there's some kind of FAA hold on the airframe registration, so you ain't flying this thing anywhere. It's parts or scrap, nothing else. A few people in the crowd muttered. Someone chuckled. Starting bid is $5,000, Hank announced. Do I hear 5,000? Silence. Marcus's heart hammered. He'd expected the bidding to start higher, much higher. Even as scrap, the aluminum alone was worth more than 5,000. Come on, folks, Hank said, his tone somewhere between desperate and irritated. 5,000 for a 737? My truck costs more than that. More silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Marcus noticed a few people glancing at the aircraft, then looking away quickly like they didn't want to acknowledge its existence. Something was off here. He could sense it in the atmosphere, in the way people avoided looking at the plane, in the nervous tension rippling through the small crowd. Nobody wanted it. But why? All right, 4,000, Hank said, dropping the starting bid. 4,000 to start. Anybody? Marcus's hand started to rise. Then he stopped himself. Wait, think. If nobody else wants it, if I'm patient, maybe I can get it for less. 3,000, Hank said, frustration seeping into his voice. I got 3,000. A man near the front raised his hand. He was tall, wearing an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in the desert salvage yard. Marcus had noticed him earlier, standing apart from everyone else, talking quietly on his phone. Thank you, Hank said, relief evident. I got 3,000 from the gentleman in front. Do I hear 4? Marcus's hand shot up before he could stop himself. 4,000? Hank pointed at him. 4,000 from the gentleman. Do I hear 5? The man in the suit turned to look at him. His face was expressionless, but something in his eyes made Marcus's skin prickle. He held Marcus's gaze for a long moment, then raised his hand. 5,000, 5,000. Hank confirmed. Do I hear 6? Marcus's mind raced. He had $9,200. That was it. That was everything. The rational part of his brain screamed to walk away. The aircraft was a disaster. The legal situation was tangled. There was clearly something suspicious about the whole thing. He had a son to think about, bills to pay, a life to live. But there was another part of him. The part that had kept him going through the 2 years since Rachel died. The part that had taught him to fix aircraft engines when everyone said he should stick to something safer. The part that refused to accept that this was all his life would ever be. That part of him saw possibility where everyone else saw problems. 6,000, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The man in the suit smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. 7,000. Hank looked between them. 7,000? Do I hear 8? Marcus hesitated. He was getting close to his ceiling. 8,000? 9,000? The man said immediately, not even waiting for Hank to ask. The crowd was paying attention now. People whispered to each other, sensing conflict. Hank pointed at Marcus. Do I hear 10,000? This was it. If he bid 10,000, he'd be over his budget. He'd have to use the emergency fund, the money he'd set aside for Louis' school expenses, for car repairs, for the 1,000 small disasters that defined single parenthood. He thought about Louis, about the look on his son's face when Marcus had to say no to things other kids took for granted, about the cramped apartment they lived in, about the rusted Honda in the parking lot that burned oil and needed new brakes, about the future that seemed to be shrinking rather than expanding with each passing year. Rachel had been a dreamer. She'd always said that opportunities didn't knock. You had to build the door they could walk through. She died doing what she loved, testing an experimental aircraft that failed catastrophically at 15,000 feet. Marcus had been angry at her for years, angry that she'd left him alone with a 6-year-old son and a mountain of debt. Angry that her dreams had cost her everything. But standing here in the desert sun, staring at an abandoned aircraft that nobody wanted, he finally understood. She hadn't died chasing dreams. She died refusing to be afraid. 10,000? He said quietly. The crowd gasped. Hank blinked. I got 10,000 from the gentleman. Do I hear 11? The man in the suit stared at him. His expression had changed, shifted into something colder, more calculating. After a long moment, he shook his head and walked away, phone already pressed to his ear. Going once, Hank said, he's gavel ready. Going twice, he paused, giving the crowd one last chance. Sold to the gentleman for $10,000. Come see me after to arrange payment and transfer. Marcus's legs felt weak. He just spent money he didn't have on an aircraft he couldn't fly, couldn't move, and probably couldn't even salvage without spending thousands more. Around him, people were already dispersing, moving on to the next lot, but he noticed a few lingering glances, people looking at him with what might have been pity or might have been something else. He made his way to Hank's makeshift office, a weather-beaten trailer parked at the edge of the lot. Inside, the air conditioning rattled and wheezed, but provided blessed relief from the heat. Hank sat behind a metal desk covered in papers, a fan pointed directly at his face. That was either the best decision you ever made or the worst, he said, pulling out a contract. I honestly can't tell which. Why doesn't anybody want it? Marcus asked, signing where he indicated. It's a 737. Even as parts, it's worth way more than 10,000. Hank leaned back in his chair, studying him. You're Marcus Wellington, right? Work over at Desert Air Maintenance. He nodded, surprised Hank knew his name. Thought I recognized you, he said. Good mechanic, from what I hear. That's why I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. He lowered his voice even though they were alone. That aircraft's got a reputation. People around here call it the Phantom Bird. It showed up in 2006, middle of the night, landed at the old airfield about 15 miles north of here. Place has been abandoned since the 90s. Nobody knows who flew it in or why. By the time the FAA and local law enforcement got out there, it was empty. No cargo, no passengers, no crew, just sitting there on the runway like it had always been there. Marcus felt a chill despite the desert heat bleeding through the trailer's thin walls. That doesn't make sense. You can't just fly a commercial aircraft and disappear. There are flight plans, air traffic control, radar. Exactly, Hank said. But apparently there's no record of it in U.S. airspace that night. No flight plan, no radio contact, nothing like it just materialized out of thin air. The FAA investigated for months. The aircraft was registered to a shell company in Panama that didn't exist anymore. The serial numbers matched a 737 that was supposed to have been scrapped in Mexico in 2004, but everything about it was wrong. He pulled out a file folder, flipped through some papers. It sat at that airfield for 2 years while various agencies argued over jurisdiction, finally got towed here when the landowner wanted it gone. We've been trying to sell it ever since, but people are spooked. There's talk it was involved in smuggling, money laundering, maybe worse. That's why the FAA won't release the registration hold. They think it might be evidence in an ongoing investigation. If it's evidence, how can you sell it? Marcus asked. Hank shrugged. Legal says we can. All the holds and liens got cleared last month. Whatever investigation there was, it's apparently closed or moved on. The aircraft is legally ours to sell, and now it's legally yours. He slid the contract across the desk, but fair warning, Mr. Wellington. 3 other people have tried to buy that bird over the years. 1 backed out at the last minute. 1 died in a car accident before the sale was finalized. The 3rd disappeared, just stopped showing up to work one day. Police couldn't find any evidence of foul play, but the family swears something happened to him. Marcus's hand froze over the signature line. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to make sure you know what you're getting into, Hank said. That man who was bidding against you. I've never seen him before today, but he showed up right before the auction started, asking specifically about Lot 47. Seemed real interested until you outbid him. Now, maybe that's nothing. Or maybe there's a reason someone with money to burn wanted that aircraft. Marcus thought about the man in the suit, about the cold calculation in his eyes, about the way he'd walked away so easily once the price went past 10,000, like he decided Marcus wasn't worth fighting, or like he decided there were simpler ways to get what he wanted. He picked up the pen and signed his name. I've made worse decisions, he said, though he couldn't actually think of any at the moment. Hank notarized the document and handed him a copy along with a set of keys, landing gear locks, and cargo door. The main cabin door is jammed, but you should be able to access through the cargo hold. You've got 90 days to move it or it reverts to us. After that, you're on your own. He paused. Mr. Wellington, can I give you some advice? Sure. Be careful. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, walk away. No piece of machinery is worth your life. Marcus left the trailer with the contract in his bag and the keys in his pocket, each one feeling heavier than it should. The sun had climbed higher, and the heat was oppressive now, radiating off every surface. Most of the crowd had dispersed, moving on to other auctions or back to their lives. But as he walked toward his car, he noticed a black SUV parked at the far end of the lot. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside, but he could feel someone watching. He got into the Honda, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. In his rearview mirror, he saw the SUV pull out and follow him for 3 blocks before turning off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was paranoia. But Marcus had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that he'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple salvage auction. It took him 2 days to arrange time to visit the aircraft. He had to work a double shift to make up for the time off, then pick up Louis from camp and drop him at his mother's house. Diane Wellington had raised 7 children and buried 1 husband, and she took the news of Marcus's purchase with the resigned composure of someone who'd stopped being surprised by life's absurdities decades ago. You bought a plane, Diane said in Spanish, stirring a pot of pozole on the stove. I bought a plane, Marcus confirmed. Can you fly it? No. Can you sell it? Maybe. Diane shook her head, but said nothing more. She knew her son well enough to recognize when Marcus had made up his mind about something. Just be careful, mijo. You have Louis to think about. I'm always thinking about Louis, Ma. That's why I'm doing this. Louis, oblivious to the adult tension, was already dragging his grandmother toward the backyard to show her a bug he'd found. Marcus watched them go, his heart squeezing tight. Louis had Rachel's curiosity, her fearlessness. He asked 1,000 questions about everything, wanted to know how things worked, why the sky was blue, what made airplanes stay up in the air. Marcus saw so much of his late wife in their son, and it was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "Dad," Louis had asked just last week, "when I grow up, can I be a pilot like Mom was?" "You can be anything you want, buddy," Marcus had told him, meaning every word, anything. But saying it and making it possible were two different things. Private pilot training cost tens of thousands of dollars. College would cost even more. The weight of providing for Louis' future pressed down on Marcus every single day. That's what made this gamble with the aircraft feel less like recklessness and more like necessity. He had to try. He had to take the risk because playing it safe meant accepting a future where Louis' dreams would always be limited by their bank account. Marcus drove north as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson. The old airfield was exactly where Hank had described it, 15 miles past the last gas station down a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. A faded sign read, "Skyline Aviation, private property, no trespassing," but the chain-link gate hung open, one hinge broken. He drove through and immediately saw it. The 737 sat at the far end of a cracked concrete runway, massive and incongruous in the empty desert. In the fading light, it looked almost majestic, like a beached whale that still remembered the ocean. The paint was faded white with a blue stripe along the fuselage, no airline markings visible. The tires were flat, the landing gear settled into the concrete like it had taken root. Marcus parked and got out, and the silence hit him immediately. No traffic, no voices, no aircraft overhead, just the whisper of wind across the desert and the distant cry of a hawk. He approached the aircraft slowly, his mechanic's eye cataloging details. The engines were surprisingly intact, though clearly inoperative. The wing surfaces showed stress cracking, but no major damage. Several cargo hold doors hung open, and he could see that the interior had been partially stripped, but the basic structure was sound. He walked the length of the fuselage, running his hand along the aluminum skin. It was hot to the touch from the day's sun, but solid. No major corrosion, no significant dents or damage. Whatever this aircraft story was, it had been well maintained at some point in its life. The landing gear struts were dirty, but not rusted. The tire rims were intact, even though the rubber had rotted away years ago. As he circled around to the starboard side, something caught his eye. Scratches in the paint near one of the cargo doors, faint but deliberate. He leaned closer, squinting in the fading light. They were numbers carved or scratched into the paint, for 18597. Could be a serial number or a code or nothing at all. He pulled out his phone and took a picture. He pulled out the keys Hank had given him and approached the main cargo door on the left side of the fuselage. The lock was stiff, but after some effort, it turned. The door groaned on its hinges as he pulled it open, revealing darkness inside. Marcus retrieved a flashlight from his car and climbed into the cargo hold. The beam of light swept across an empty space that should have held baggage, cargo containers, mail. Instead, there was nothing. The floor was clean, almost too clean. No dust, no debris, no signs that anything had ever been stored here. The cargo hold of a 737 was cavernous when empty. Marcus's footsteps echoed as he moved deeper, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air inside was stale but not musty, like the aircraft had been sealed properly against the elements. He checked the structural supports, looking for signs of stress or damage. Everything looked solid. He moved deeper into the hold, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. The cargo area of a 737 was huge, and without cargo or equipment, it felt like a cavern. His light caught something on the far wall, a seam that shouldn't be there. He moved closer, running his hand along the surface. It was a panel, expertly installed to blend with the surrounding structure, but definitely not original to the aircraft. Marcus had worked on enough 737s to know every inch of their standard configuration. This was custom work, high quality, designed to be invisible to casual inspection. He searched the edges of the panel, looking for a release mechanism. Nothing obvious. He pressed different sections, feeling for give. Still nothing. Then he noticed something. A small keyhole, no bigger than his pinky, hidden in the corner where the panel met the floor. None of the keys Hank had given him were small enough. He'd need tools, probably a drill or a pry bar to get it open. Marcus knelt there in the darkness, his flashlight beam focused on that tiny keyhole, and felt the first real flutter of excitement mixed with fear. This wasn't normal. Aircraft didn't have secret compartments unless someone wanted to hide something, and whatever they'd hidden had been important enough to custom build a panel that blended seamlessly with the original structure. He stood up, swept his light around the cargo hold one more time. Now that he knew what to look for, he spotted other anomalies. A section of floor that didn't quite match the rest. Rivets that were newer, cleaner than the surrounding ones. Someone had modified this aircraft extensively, and they'd done it professionally. Marcus climbed out of the cargo hold and walked back to his car as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow he'd come back with tools. Tomorrow he'd find out what was behind that panel. Tomorrow his life would change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. But tonight, driving back toward the city, lights scattered across the dark desert, Marcus Wellington allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Not yet, but possibility. The chance that maybe, just maybe, he'd found that door Rachel always talked about, the one opportunities walked through. He stopped at a red light and pulled out his phone, looking at the picture he'd taken of those scratched numbers, for 18597. On impulse, he opened his browser and typed them in, adding aircraft to the search. The results made his blood run cold. The first hit was a news article from 2003. Federal Reserve heist remains unsolved. $324 million still missing. He clicked on it, his hands trembling slightly. Authorities are no closer to solving one of the largest cash robberies in U.S. history, the article read. On November 12, 2003, approximately $324 million in unmarked bills were stolen from a Federal Reserve transfer facility in Tucson, Arizona. The theft occurred during a routine transfer between facilities. Security footage shows for individuals, but their identities remain unknown. The money has never been recovered. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI. The article included a tip line number for 18597. Marcus sat at the red light, staring at his phone screen as cars honked behind him. He didn't move, couldn't move. His mind was racing, connecting dots he didn't want to connect. A 737 that appeared out of nowhere in 2006. A mysterious aircraft with no traceable ownership. A cargo hold that had been meticulously cleaned and modified. A hidden compartment with a keyhole. Numbers scratched into the paint that matched a federal robbery tip line. And someone in an expensive suit who'd been very interested in buying this aircraft until he outbid him. He finally drove through the intersection, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the engine. This wasn't just a salvage opportunity. This wasn't just an old aircraft he could part out for profit. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that could either save his family or destroy everything he'd worked for. He just prayed that when he opened that compartment, he'd find it empty. That his imagination was running wild, that the numbers were just a coincidence, and the modified cargo hold had some innocent explanation. But deep down, in the part of him that had learned to trust instinct over hope, Marcus Wellington knew better. He knew that tomorrow, when he came back with tools and pried open that panel, he was going to find something that would change everything. He just didn't know yet whether it would be his salvation or his doom. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying everything he'd seen, everything he'd found, everything that newspaper article had said. $324 million stolen from a Federal Reserve facility in 2003, never recovered. And those numbers scratched into the paint of an aircraft that had mysteriously appeared 3 years after the robbery. It couldn't be a coincidence, but it also couldn't be real, could it? At 4 o'clock in the morning, he gave up on sleep and made coffee. His hands shook as he poured it, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in his bloodstream. He pulled up the article again on his laptop, reading every word, following every link. The robbery had been meticulously planned. For people, inside knowledge of the transfer schedule, in and out in under 12 minutes. The security footage showed figures in masks and coveralls, but nothing identifiable. The getaway vehicle had been found abandoned 2 miles away, wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA, no leads. The money had simply vanished. Marcus clicked through more articles, each one raising more questions. The FBI had investigated for years. Theories ranged from an inside job to organized crime to foreign operatives. But without the money and without suspects, the case had gone cold by 2007. The last update he could find was from 2012, a brief mention that the case remained open but inactive. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. If the money was on that aircraft, and if he opened that compartment, what then? He couldn't just keep it. That was federal property, stolen property. He'd go to prison. Louis would end up in foster care or living with Diane full-time. Everything Marcus had worked for would be destroyed. But if he reported it, what would he get? Maybe a reward if the government was feeling generous, maybe nothing but a thank you and a mountain of paperwork. Either way, the aircraft would be seized as evidence and his $10,000 investment would be gone. There was a third option, the one that made his stomach turn even as his practical mind considered it. He could open the compartment, see what was really there, and if it was the money, he could walk away. Pretend he never found it. Sell the aircraft for parts. Let someone else discover the secret. Clean hands, clear conscience. Except he'd know. He'd always know. And Marcus had never been good at living with secrets. Louis padded into the kitchen around 6 o'clock, his hair a mess, dragging his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Dad, why are you up so early?" Marcus closed his laptop quickly. "Couldn't sleep, buddy. Want some pancakes?" Louis climbed into a chair, studying his father with those knowing eyes that seemed far too old for 8 years. "You look worried." "I'm fine, kiddo." "Is it about the airplane?" Marcus poured batter onto the griddle, watching it sizzle. "Yeah, it's about the airplane. Grandma says you made a bad choice buying it." Marcus turned to look at his son. "What do you think?" Louis shrugged, swinging his legs under the chair. "I think Mom would have bought it, too. She always said, adventures are just problems you haven't solved yet." Marcus's throat tightened. He crossed the kitchen and hugged Louis, breathing in the scent of his son's shampoo. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Louis said matter-of-factly. "You just don't notice because I'm short." That afternoon, Marcus dropped Louis at his mother's house again, ignoring Diane's pointed questions about why he needed so much childcare lately. He drove to a hardware store and bought a cordless drill, a set of bits, and a heavy-duty pry bar. The clerk, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, eyed his purchases. "Demo job?" he asked. "Something like that," Marcus replied. He drove north again, this time in full daylight. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional Joshua tree. The sky was cloudless, achingly blue, the kind of perfect day that made Arizona beautiful and brutal in equal measure. He kept checking his rearview mirror, looking for the black SUV or any other signs he was being followed. The road remained empty behind him. The airfield looked different in daylight, less ominous, more sad. The abandoned terminal building had broken windows and graffiti on one wall. The control tower listed slightly to the left, its windows long since shattered. The 737 sat at the far end of the runway like a monument to dreams that had died here. Marcus parked in the same spot as before and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. This was it, the moment of truth. Once he opened that compartment, there was no going back. Whatever was inside would change everything. He grabbed his tools and walked to the aircraft, his boots crunching on the sun-baked concrete. The cargo door was still unlocked from his previous visit. He pulled it open and climbed inside, the temperature dropping noticeably in the shaded interior. The panel looked exactly as he remembered, seamlessly integrated into the cargo hold wall. Marcus set down his tools and ran his hand along the seam one more time, feeling for any mechanism he might have missed. Nothing. The keyhole remained the only visible access point. He picked up the drill, selected a bit, and positioned it carefully beside the lock. His plan was to drill out the lock mechanism, then use the pry bar to force the panel open. Not elegant, but effective. The drill whined to life, the sound echoing loudly in the enclosed space. Metal shavings fell as the bit chewed through the lock housing. It took longer than he expected. The lock was hardened steel designed to resist exactly this kind of attack. But after 20 minutes of drilling from different angles, he felt the resistance change. The lock mechanism was compromised. Marcus set down the drill and picked up the pry bar. He wedged it into the seam at the edge of the panel and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, putting his full weight into it. The panel groaned, but held firm. He repositioned the bar, trying different angles, different leverage points. On the fifth attempt, something gave. A metallic snap echoed through the cargo hold, and the panel shifted slightly inward. Marcus's heart raced. He wedged the bar deeper and pulled again. This time, the panel swung open on hidden hinges. Behind it was darkness. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed a compartment about 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and maybe 3 feet deep. Custom built, lined with what looked like waterproof material. And inside, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling, were bundles of cash. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched the nearest bundle. It was real. United States currency, held together with paper bands. He pulled out the bundle and examined it under the flashlight. All hundreds. He counted quickly. 100 bills in the stack. $10,000 in his hand. He looked back into the compartment. There were rows of these bundles stacked carefully, filling the entire space. His mind struggled to process the scale. How many bundles? How much money? He started counting, using his phone's camera to keep track. 10 bundles across, 20 bundles high, 3 bundles deep in the first row. That was 600 bundles. At $10,000 each, that was $6 million. And there were multiple rows. Marcus stepped back, nearly dropping his flashlight. This wasn't just money. This was generational wealth. This was enough to never worry about bills again, to send Louis to any college he wanted, to buy a house, to live without fear. This was also federal property stolen in a heist that had made national news. This was evidence in an open FBI investigation. This was 20 years to life in a federal prison if he got caught with it. He stood there in the cargo hold surrounded by more money than he'd ever imagined seeing in his lifetime and felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Louis wants to know when you're picking him up. Also, he skinned his knee. He's fine, but dramatic about it. Marcus looked from his phone to the open compartment and back again. Louis. Everything he did was for Louis. But what kind of example would he be setting if he kept this money? And what kind of father would he be if he passed up the chance to give his son the life he deserved? He took pictures of the compartment, the stacks of money, the serial numbers on several of the bundles. Then he carefully closed the panel, pushing it back into place. The damaged lock wouldn't hold it completely secure, but it would stay closed enough not to attract casual attention. Marcus climbed out of the cargo hold and sat on the edge of the door, legs dangling, staring out at the empty desert. He needed time to think. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. He needed help. But who could he trust with something like this? He drove back to the city as the sun began its descent, his mind churning through options and consequences. He stopped at a library and used one of their public computers to search for more information about the heist, not wanting the searches tied to his home internet or phone. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. The stolen money had been in transit between Federal Reserve banks, part of a regular rotation of currency. It had been meticulously tracked. Every serial number recorded. If any of those bills ever surfaced in the banking system, they'd be flagged immediately. The money was essentially useless unless laundered. And laundering $324 million would require resources and connections Marcus didn't have. He found FBI press releases from 2003 and 2004 offering rewards for information leading to the recovery of the funds. The most recent reward amount was $6 million, a fraction of the total, but still life-changing money and legal. Marcus closed the browser and sat back thinking. $6 million. That was the smart play, the safe play. Call the FBI, report the discovery, claim the reward, walk away clean. He'd lose the aircraft, but he'd gain enough money to build a real future for Louis. Except, there was a problem. Multiple problems, actually. First, someone else knew about that money. The man in the expensive suit who'd bid on the aircraft hadn't been there by accident. He'd wanted it specifically, and he'd been willing to pay for it until Marcus pushed the price too high, which meant he either knew about the money or suspected it was there. And if he knew, others might know, too. Second, the aircraft itself was strange. I was thinking about the reward, Marcus said. $6 million. That's enough to change my life without touching the stolen money. It is, Vincent agreed. But here's what I think happened. Someone stole that money in 2003. They needed to move it, hide it, keep it safe until the heat died down. So they acquired a 737, probably through channels that couldn't be traced, loaded the money aboard, and parked it somewhere remote. Maybe Mexico, maybe Central America, somewhere they had control. But why move it to Arizona in 2006? Good question. My guess, something changed. Maybe there was political instability wherever they had it stashed. Maybe they got worried about it being discovered. Maybe they needed it closer to the US for eventual laundering. So, they flew it to that airfield under cover of darkness, probably filed a fake flight plan or bribed someone to erase the records and left it there. But then, why not retrieve the money? Vincent shook his head. That's the part one can't figure out. Maybe they were waiting for the statute of limitations, except there isn't one for federal theft. Maybe there was a falling out among the thieves. Maybe the key players died or got arrested for something else. But for some reason, that money has been sitting there for almost 20 years. Marcus thought about this. The man at the auction, you think he was connected to the original heist? Maybe. Or maybe he works for the people who were. The fact that he was there specifically for that aircraft, that suggests active monitoring. They know where their money is and they've been keeping tabs on it. So, what do we do? Vincent leaned back, his expression grim. We need more information before we make any moves. I want to dig into the history of that aircraft. Track down who really owned it. See if I can find any connections to the original heist. Meanwhile, you need to be very careful. Don't go back to that aircraft alone. Don't talk to anyone else about this and watch your back. You think they'll come after me? I think they'll want to know what you know and what you plan to do. Whether they approach you with threats or offers or violence depends on who they are and how desperate they're getting." He paused. "Do you have somewhere safe you and Louis can stay if things get dangerous?" Marcus thought of his mother's house, her small apartment, the limited options available to a single father with no money and no connections. "Not really." "Then we need to move fast. Give me 48 hours to do some digging. In the meantime, act normal. Go to work. Take care of Louis. Pretend everything's fine. If anyone asks about the aircraft, tell them you're planning to part it out. Haven't had time to look at it closely yet." "Okay." Vincent stood up, threw cash on the table for the coffee. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. This isn't like the maintenance fraud case. This is federal crime. Organized criminals. Potentially millions of dollars at stake. People have killed for a lot less. If at any point you want to walk away, if you want me to make an anonymous call to the FBI and let them handle it, I will. No judgment." Marcus thought about Louis, about the skinned knee and the stuffed dinosaur and the dreams of becoming a pilot someday. He thought about the cramped apartment and the rusted Honda and the future that seemed to be shrinking instead of expanding. "I can't walk away," he said quietly. "Not yet. Not until we know what we're really dealing with." Vincent nodded. "Then we do this carefully and we do this smart. I'll call you in 2 days." He left and Marcus sat alone in the booth for another 10 minutes staring at his phone at the pictures of all that money. A fortune that wasn't his. A secret that could destroy him. A choice that would define the rest of his life. He thought about the numbers scratched into the aircraft's paint. Someone had put them there as a message, a clue, maybe a confession. Someone who'd been part of this had wanted the truth to be found someday. Marcus finished his cold coffee and stood up. He had work in an hour, a normal shift, doing normal repairs on normal aircraft. He'd go through the motions, pretend everything was fine, wait for Vincent to call. But as he walked to his car, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted, the engine running. It could have been anyone. It probably was just someone waiting for someone else. But Marcus's instincts, honed by years of single fatherhood and survival, screamed otherwise. He got into his Honda without looking directly at the SUV, started the engine, and pulled into traffic. The SUV followed. His heart rate picked up. He made a series of random turns, watching his rearview mirror. The SUV stayed with him, maintaining a careful distance. Not trying to hide, just making sure he knew he was being watched. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Vincent had been right. They were already watching him, already making their presence known. This was a message. "We know who you are. We know what you found, and we're not going away." He drove to the garage where he worked, pulled into the employee parking lot. The SUV drove past slowly, the driver's window tinted too dark to see through. Then it continued down the street and disappeared around a corner. Marcus sat in his car, breathing hard, hands shaking. This was real. This was happening. He wasn't just dealing with stolen money anymore. He was dealing with people who were willing to follow him, intimidate him, maybe worse. He pulled out his phone and texted Vincent. "They're already watching me. Black SUV just followed me to work." His response came quickly. "Don't panic. Don't do anything unusual. I'm accelerating my timeline. We'll have information tonight. Stay safe." Marcus put his phone away and forced himself to get out of the car, to walk into the garage, to clock in and start working on a Cessna that needed an oil change. Normal. Everything was normal. Just another day. But his hand still shook as he drained the oil. And he jumped at every sound, every shadow. Because Marcus Wellington knew that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't control. He'd found something he wasn't supposed to find. And now the people who'd hidden it knew his name. The question wasn't whether they'd come for him. The question was when and what he'd do when they arrived. The oil change on the Cessna should have taken 45 minutes. Marcus stretched it to 2 hours, checking and rechecking everything, using the familiar work to calm his racing mind. But his hands kept trembling, and twice he dropped his wrench. His supervisor, a gruff man named Pete, who'd been working on aircraft since before Marcus was born, noticed. "You all right?" he asked, leaning against the workbench. "Fine," Marcus said, wiping grease from his hands. "Just tired." Pete studied him with eyes that had seen too many mechanics burn out. Too many people trying to hide problems. "You don't look fine. You look scared." Marcus met his gaze. "I'm handling it. Whatever it is, if you need help, you ask. Understand?" He nodded, grateful, but knowing Pete couldn't help with this. Nobody could help with this except Vincent. And he was who knows where, digging into secrets that had gotten people killed. His shift ended at 5. Marcus walked to his car, scanning the parking lot for the black SUV. It wasn't there, but that didn't mean they weren't watching. He drove to pick up Louis from camp, checking his mirrors constantly. No tail that he could see. Maybe they'd made their point. Maybe they were backing off. Or maybe they were just getting started. Louis climbed into the car covered in paint and glitter, chattering excitedly about the art project they'd made. Marcus listened with half his attention, the other half watching every car, every shadow, every person who looked at them too long. "Dad, you're not listening," Louis said. "I am, buddy. You made a spaceship. A rocket ship. There's a difference." "You're right. I'm sorry." Marcus reached over and squeezed his son's hand. "Tell me again." They stopped at a grocery store on the way home. Marcus needed milk and bread and something resembling vegetables for dinner. He held Louis' hand as they walked through the parking lot, his other hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around his keys, positioned as a weapon. Rachel had taught him that back when they were dating, when she'd wanted him to be safe walking alone at night. Inside the store, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Marcus grabbed a cart and started down the produce aisle. Louis wandered a few feet ahead, examining apples with the serious concentration of someone choosing the perfect one. That's when Marcus saw him, the man from the auction, the one in the expensive suit. He was standing near the deli counter, not looking at food, looking directly at him. Their eyes met across the store, and he smiled, not threatening, just knowing. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Marcus's blood ran cold. He grabbed Louis' hand. "Come on, buddy. We need to go." "But we just got here." "Now, Louis." Something in Marcus's tone made Louis stop arguing. They abandoned the cart and headed for the exit, Marcus's eyes scanning for the man in the suit. He didn't see him. They reached the Honda, and Marcus practically lifted Louis into the back seat, his hands shaking as he buckled the seat belt. "Dad, you're scaring me," Louis said, his voice small. Marcus forced himself to take a breath. "Everything's okay. I just forgot something. We'll come back later." He drove straight to his mother's house, breaking the speed limit, running a yellow light. Diane opened the door, looking concerned. "Mijo, what's wrong? Can Louis stay here tonight?" Marcus asked. "Maybe a few nights." Diane looked from Marcus to Louis and back again. "What's happened?" "Nothing. I have to deal with some things with the aircraft and it might take a few late nights. I don't want Louis home alone." It was a weak excuse, and Diane's expression said she knew it, but she also knew her son well enough to recognize when pushing would make things worse. Of course, he can stay. Louis, go wash your hands. I'm making tamales. Louis hugged Marcus tight before running off. Diane pulled her son into the kitchen, closed the door. Tell me the truth, mijo. I can't. Not yet. But I need you to promise me something. Don't let Louis go anywhere without you. Not camp, not to a friend's house, nowhere. And if anyone asks about me or about that aircraft, you tell them you don't know anything. Diane's face paled. Marcus, you're frightening me. What have you gotten into? I'm going to fix it. I promise. Just keep Louis safe. Marcus left before his mother could ask more questions, before he could break down and tell her everything. He drove home as darkness settled over the city, checking his mirrors constantly. No black SUV, no man in an expensive suit, just Phoenix traffic and his racing heart. His apartment was on the third floor of a complex that had been built in the 1980s and hadn't been updated since. Marcus climbed the exterior stairs slowly, keys ready, every sense alert. His door was locked exactly as he'd left it. He went inside, locked it behind him, and stood in the small living room trying to breathe normally. His phone rang. Vincent. Tell me you have good news, Marcus said. I have information. Whether it's good is debatable. He heard papers rustling. That aircraft has a very interesting history. The serial numbers match a Boeing 737 that was manufactured in 1982, sold to a Mexican airline, and officially scrapped in 2004. Except it wasn't scrapped. Someone falsified the paperwork and moved it off the books. Who? That's where it gets complicated. The Mexican airline was connected to a businessman named Eduardo Morales. On paper, he ran legitimate import-export businesses. In reality, he was moving drugs and money for one of the cartels. He died in 2005, shot outside a restaurant in Guadalajara. Marcus sat down on his couch. So, the cartel stole the Federal Reserve money. Maybe. Or maybe they were hired to move it. The heist itself was too clean, too professional to be cartel work. They're good at violence, not at sophisticated robberies, but moving and hiding large amounts of cash, that's exactly what they do. So, someone stole the money, hired Morales to hide it, and he put it on an aircraft he'd made disappear from official records. That's my working theory. And here's the interesting part. In 2006, right around the time that aircraft appeared at the Arizona airfield, there was a major cartel war in Mexico. Morales' organization got torn apart. A lot of his people were killed or scattered. My guess is someone flew that aircraft to Arizona to get it away from the violence, planning to come back for it later, but they never did. Why? No. And I think I know why. Vincent paused. I pulled the FBI case files, the public ones anyway. The lead investigator on the Federal Reserve heist was an agent named Thomas Bradley. He worked that case for 8 years, convinced it was an inside job. In 2011, he died of a heart attack. Case got reassigned, eventually went cold. You think the heart attack wasn't natural? I think a lot of convenient things happened to people connected to this case. But here's what's really interesting. 6 months before Bradley died, he filed a request to investigate possible connections between the heist and cartel money laundering operations. The request was denied by his supervisor, a man named Gerald Hackett. Marcus felt a chill. And where's Hackett now? Retired, lives in Scottsdale. Very comfortable retirement for someone who spent 30 years on a government salary. You think he was involved? I think someone high up made sure that investigation never went anywhere. And I think whoever that was, they are still protecting their interests. Marcus stood up, started pacing. The man from the auction, he was at the grocery store tonight, just standing there watching me, making sure I knew he could get close anytime he wanted. Damn it, Vincent muttered. They're escalating. Marcus, you need to be very careful. These aren't people who make empty threats. I know. I took Louis to my mother's. He's staying there until this is over. Good. Smart. Now, listen. I've been thinking about our options. We could still call the FBI, report everything, hope they protect you, but given that there's likely corruption involved at high levels, I don't love that plan. What's the alternative? We go public. I have contacts at the Arizona Republic. Investigative journalists who would love a story like this. We give them everything. The aircraft, the money, the connections to the cartel, the suspicious death of Agent Bradley, Hackett's comfortable retirement. Make it too big to bury. Marcus thought about this. But that puts a target on our backs. We already have targets on our backs. At least this way we have the protection of public scrutiny. They can't make us disappear once the story is out there. I need another day to nail down a few more details, get some documentation. Can you hold on that long? Do I have a choice? No, Vincent said quietly. I don't think any of us do anymore. They hung up and Marcus stood in his empty apartment listening to the sounds of other people's lives through thin walls. A TV playing too loud, a couple arguing, a baby crying, normal problems, normal lives. He'd give anything to have those problems instead of the ones he had. He made himself eat something, though he couldn't taste it. He tried to watch TV, but couldn't focus. Finally, around 11, exhausted beyond measure, he went to bed. Sleep came in fits and starts, full of dreams about aircraft falling from the sky and men in suits who smiled while reaching for his son. He woke at 3 a.m. to his phone ringing. The number was blocked. Marcus answered. Hello, Mr. Wellington. The voice was male, cultured, calm. I apologize for calling so late, but I thought we should talk. Every muscle in Marcus's body tensed. Who is this? A concerned party. You've acquired something that belongs to people I represent. We'd like to discuss recovering it. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, Mr. Wellington. We both know you found the compartment. The question is, what do you plan to do about it? Marcus's mind raced. How did they know he'd opened it? Had they been watching the aircraft? Had they installed cameras? If you want it so badly, why didn't you buy it at the auction? We tried. You were surprisingly persistent. We admire that. But persistence without wisdom can be dangerous. Is that a threat? It's advice. You have a son, Louis, 8 years old, loves art, wants to be a pilot like his mother was. He's at his grandmother's house right now, probably sleeping peacefully. It would be a shame if anything disturbed that peace. Marcus's blood turned to ice. You stay away from him. We have no desire to hurt anyone, Mr. Wellington. We simply want what belongs to our clients. Here's what I propose. You tell us where the aircraft is. You walk away, and we compensate you for your trouble. Let's say $100,000. That's more than fair for a $10,000 investment. And if I say no? Then we'll be forced to pursue other options. Options that are unpleasant for everyone involved. You seem like a smart man, a good father. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. I need time to think. You have 24 hours. I'll call tomorrow night at this time. I suggest you have an answer ready. The line went dead. Marcus sat in his dark bedroom, phone gripped in his shaking hand, fighting the urge to vomit. They knew about Louis. They knew where Louis was. They were threatening his son. He called Vincent. He answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the hour. What happened? He told him about the call, his voice breaking when he got to the part about Louis. Vincent listened without interrupting, and when Marcus finished, he heard him moving around, the sound of a car door closing. "I'm coming to you," he said. "Right now. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Marcus got dressed, turned on every light in the apartment, checked that the door was locked 3 times. He texted his mother. "Lock all the doors and windows. Don't let anyone in. I'll explain tomorrow." Diane responded immediately. "What's happening?" "Just please, Ma, lock everything." The wait for Vincent felt like hours. Marcus stood at his window watching the parking lot, looking for black SUVs or men in expensive suits or any sign that they were coming for him. The complex was quiet, just a few cars, no movement. Vincent's truck pulled up at exactly 3:22 a.m. Marcus watched him get out, scan the area with the practiced eye of someone who'd worked dangerous cases before, then head for his building. He unlocked the door only when he heard his knock, the pattern they'd agreed on years ago when working the insurance fraud case. He came in carrying a laptop bag and wearing an expression Marcus had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Concern. Real concern. "Show me the call log," he said. Marcus handed him his phone. Vincent examined it, took pictures of the blocked number with his own phone. "They're using a burner, probably untraceable, but I have a contact who might be able to narrow down the location it was called from. They know about Louis. They know where he is. I heard. We're going to get him somewhere safer. I have a friend in Flagstaff who owns a cabin. Totally off-grid. Your mother and Louis can go there tomorrow. Stay until this is resolved. My mother won't go without knowing why. Then tell her. Not everything, but enough. She needs to understand the danger." Marcus nodded, fighting back tears. This was supposed to be a smart investment, a way to build a better future. Instead, he'd endangered the 2 people he loved most in the world. Vincent set up his laptop on his kitchen table. "Okay, here's where we are. We can't wait another day to go public. These people are moving faster than I expected. They're desperate, which means they're dangerous. We need to get ahead of this." "How?" "I'm going to send everything I have to my contact at the Arizona Republic tonight. Right now. By morning, this story will be in the hands of journalists who can protect themselves and their sources. Once it's public, once everyone knows about the money and the aircraft and the connections to the cartel and the FBI, they can't threaten you into silence because you won't be the only one who knows. But they can still hurt Louis." Vincent looked at him steadily. "Which is why you and Louis and your mother are leaving Phoenix tomorrow. New names, new location. Just until this settles. I have resources. People who owe me favors. I can make that happen. Run away. Stay alive," Vincent corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus thought about his apartment, his job, the life he'd built brick by brick after Rachel died. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed. This isn't fair. No, it's not. But fair doesn't matter when you're dead. He watched him type, compiling information into an email, documents, photos, timelines, connections, the whole story laid out in black and white. He attached the pictures Marcus had taken of the money, of the compartment, of the aircraft. He wrote a cover message explaining the situation, the threats, the danger. "Once I send this, there's no taking it back," Vincent said. "The story goes live tomorrow. By tomorrow night, half the country will know about the Phantom Bird and the missing Federal Reserve money. Is that what you want?" Marcus thought about the voice on the phone, calm and cultured and absolutely certain he could hurt his son. He thought about the man at the grocery store, about the black SUV, about all the ways powerful people could destroy someone like him if he didn't fight back. "Send it," he said. Vincent hit send. The email disappeared into the digital void, carrying with it Marcus's last chance at a quiet resolution. There was no going back now. "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "Next, we wait until morning. Then I drive you to your mother's house. We explain what's happening and I take all three of you north. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll be somewhere safe. By tomorrow evening, this story will be everywhere, and you'll have the protection of being a public figure instead of a quiet victim. And after that? After that, we hope the FBI does its job. We hope the journalists dig deep enough to expose everyone involved. We hope the publicity makes it too risky to come after you." That's a lot of hoping. Vincent closed his laptop and looked at him with something like sympathy. "Yeah, it is. But hope's all we've got right now." They sat in Marcus's kitchen as the hours crawled toward dawn, neither of them sleeping, both of them waiting for whatever came next. Vincent made coffee. Marcus called his mother and explained enough to make Diane understand they needed to leave the city for a while. Diane asked questions Marcus couldn't answer, but eventually agreed to pack bags and be ready. At 6 a.m., Vincent's phone rang. He answered, listened, his expression darkening. When he hung up, he looked at Marcus. "That was my contact at the paper. They're running the story in this morning's edition, print and online. It goes live in 30 minutes. "Good," Marcus said, trying to feel brave. "There's something else." While they were fact-checking, they reached out to the FBI for comment. The FBI confirmed the Federal Reserve heist is still an open investigation, and they said they've reopened it recently based on new evidence. What new evidence? They wouldn't say, but the timing is interesting. They reopened it 3 weeks ago. Marcus's stomach dropped. Right before the aircraft went up for auction. Exactly. They looked at each other, the implication settling over them like a shroud. The FBI had known. They'd known about the aircraft, about the possible location of the money, and they'd let it go to auction anyway, which meant they were either incompetent or they had their own agenda. "We need to get you out of here," Vincent said, standing up. "Right now." They walked to the parking lot just as the sun began to paint the sky pink and orange. Vincent scanned the area, saw nothing concerning, nodded for Marcus to follow. They climbed into his truck. That's when the black SUV pulled in, blocking the exit. 2 men got out. Not the man from the auction. These were different, harder, wearing jeans and windbreakers that didn't quite hide the weapons underneath. They walked toward Vincent's truck with the casual confidence of people who'd done this before. Vincent's hand went to the glove compartment. "Get down." "What?" "Get down on the floor now." Marcus dropped down as Vincent pulled out a handgun. He'd never known he carried one. The men were almost to the truck now. One of them raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Vincent rolled down his window. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The closer one smiled. "We just want to talk to Mr. Wellington." "No trouble, just a conversation." He's not interested in conversations with people who threaten children. The smile vanished. "That's unfortunate. Our employer was hoping for a peaceful resolution. Last chance to reconsider." Vincent started the engine. "Tell your employer Mr. Wellington has nothing to say to him. The story is already out. By now, half of Phoenix knows about your money. The FBI's probably on their way. You want to add kidnapping to your list of charges?" The men looked at each other. One of them touched his ear like he was wearing a communications device, listening to instructions. After a moment, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is," Vincent replied. He put the truck in reverse, backed up fast, then whipped around the SUV, and accelerated toward the exit. Marcus stayed on the floor, his heart hammering, until they were 3 blocks away. "You can get up now," Vincent said. Marcus climbed back into his seat, shaking. "You have a gun." "I have several. Comes with the job." He was driving fast, but not recklessly, checking mirrors constantly. "They're not following yet." "Where are we going?" "Your mother's house." "We get Louis. We get Diane. And we head north." "Different route than I planned." "Nothing predictable. We'll switch vehicles halfway. Make sure we're not being tracked." Marcus pulled out his phone and saw he had 17 missed calls. Most from blocked numbers, 3 from the Arizona Republic. He called the reporter back. "Mr. Wellington," the woman answered immediately. "This is Jennifer Cruz from the Republic. I've been trying to reach you. We published your story 20 minutes ago. It's already getting national attention. I need to ask you some follow-up questions. I can't talk right now. We're in danger." "From who?" "The people who hid the money." "Yes. They were just at my apartment. They tried to stop us from leaving." "Are you safe now?" "For the moment." "Mr. Wellington, listen to me. This story is huge. We're getting calls from CNN, from the Times, from everyone. The FBI issued a statement saying they're launching a full investigation. You're a public figure now, which means you have some protection, but you need to stay somewhere safe until this settles. Do you have somewhere to go?" "Yes." "Good. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone except law enforcement. And if you feel threatened, call 911 immediately. You're a witness now. Possibly the key witness. That gives you some leverage." They hung up and Marcus stared at his phone. A witness? A key witness to what? He just found money that was already stolen, but he supposed in the complicated calculus of federal crimes that made him important somehow. They reached Diane's house just after 7. His mother opened the door looking exhausted and frightened, Louis standing behind her in pajamas. "Dad!" Louis ran to Marcus, hugging him tight. Marcus held his son, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling tears run down his face. "It's okay, buddy. Everything's going to be okay." But even as he said it, looking over Louis's head at Vincent's grim expression and his mother's frightened eyes, Marcus wasn't sure he believed it. Because the truth he'd uncovered hadn't set him free, it had made him a target. And now the only way forward was through the fire, hoping he could protect the people he loved while the whole world watched him burn. They drove north in silence. 3 generations of Wellingtons crammed into Vincent's truck with hastily packed bags and questions that had no easy answers. Louis sat in the back seat next to his grandmother, watching the desert landscape blur past, sensing the tension in the air, but not fully understanding it. Diane held her grandson's hand and stared out the window, her lips moving in silent prayer. Marcus watched the highway behind them through the side mirror, looking for black SUVs, for men in expensive suits, for any sign they were being followed, but the road remained clear, just morning commuters heading into Phoenix as they fled in the opposite direction. Vincent's phone rang constantly. Reporters, law enforcement, people Marcus had never heard of. He ignored most of them, answered a few with cryptic responses. No comment. He's somewhere safe. Talk to his lawyer. Marcus didn't have a lawyer, but Vincent said he'd need one soon. They stopped at a gas station outside Payson to switch vehicles. One of Vincent's contacts met them there with a dusty Ford Explorer that had seen better days, but ran quietly and wouldn't attract attention. They transferred their bags quickly while Vincent swept his truck for tracking devices. He found 2 small magnetic boxes attached to the undercarriage. They tagged us at your apartment, he said, crushing them under his boot. We're clear now. They reached the cabin just after noon. It was tucked into the pine forests north of Flagstaff, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through trees so thick they blocked out the sun. The cabin itself was small but sturdy, built decades ago by someone who'd valued privacy over comfort. No internet, no cell service, just a landline that Vincent said was untraceable. Diane took Louis inside to rest. The boy had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted by the early morning and the confusion of adults who wouldn't explain what was happening. Marcus stood on the porch watching the forest, feeling like he was in a different world than the one he'd left that morning. "How long do we stay here?" he asked Vincent. "Few days, maybe a week. Long enough for the story to fully break, for law enforcement to get organized, for the initial chaos to settle." He leaned against the porch railing. "The FBI will want to talk to you. So will the U.S. Attorney's Office. You're going to need to cooperate fully. Tell them everything." "And then what?" "And then we hope they do their job. The money's evidence now. The aircraft's evidence. Everyone connected to this is going to be under investigation. If we're lucky, they'll be too busy protecting themselves to worry about you." Marcus thought about the voice on the phone, about the men in his parking lot, about all the ways this could still go wrong. "And if we're not lucky?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Then we deal with it. But you're not alone in this, Marcus. You've got me. You've got the media attention. You've got the law on your side now. That's more than a lot of people get." Over the next 3 days, the story exploded across every news outlet in the country. The Arizona Republic's initial report had been picked up by the Associated Press, then CNN, then everyone else. "Phantom bird yields fortune," read one headline. "Single father discovers stolen Federal Reserve millions," read another. Marcus's name was everywhere, his face on television. Reporters camped outside his apartment building and his mother's house. The FBI issued multiple statements confirming the money was connected to the 2003 heist, confirming they were investigating, confirming Marcus Wellington was cooperating fully. What they didn't confirm was who'd hidden the money, who'd protected it for 20 years, or how an entire Boeing 737 had disappeared from official records. But journalists were digging. The Arizona Republic's Jennifer Cruz had written a follow-up piece connecting the aircraft to Eduardo Morales and the Mexican cartel. Other reporters were looking into Agent Thomas Bradley's suspicious death, into Gerald Hackett's comfortable retirement, into the shell companies and falsified documents. On the 4th day at the cabin, 2 FBI agents arrived. They were professional, polite, and very thorough. They spent 6 hours interviewing Marcus, taking him through every detail from the auction to the discovery to the threats. They photographed the pictures on his phone, took copies of his documentation, asked the same questions in different ways to verify his story remained consistent. "Mr. Wellington," the senior agent said as they prepared to leave, "I want to be clear about something. You're not in any legal jeopardy. You purchased that aircraft legally. You discovered evidence of a crime and you reported it. That makes you a witness, not a suspect. What about the reward?" Marcus asked. He'd been too afraid to even think about it until now, but Vincent had brought it up the night before. $6 million for information leading to the recovery of the stolen funds. The agents looked at each other. "That's not our department. But yes, you would likely qualify. There's a process, paperwork, verification. Could take months or even years to sort out, but assuming everything checks out, the reward would be yours." After they left, Marcus sat on the porch steps and let himself cry for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not from fear or stress, though he'd had plenty of both. These were tears of relief, of hope, of the slowly dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he was going to survive this. Louis found him there and climbed into his lap without a word. At 8 years old, he was getting too big for this, but Marcus held him anyway, pressing his face into his son's hair. "Are the bad people gone?" Louis asked quietly. "I don't know," "Buddy, but we're safe here, and there are good people working to make sure they can't hurt us. Grandma says you found treasure." Marcus smiled despite everything. "Something like that." "Like pirates?" "More like archaeologists. I found something that belonged to someone else, and I gave it back." Louis thought about this. "Did they say thank you?" "Not yet, but they will." 2 weeks later, Marcus returned to Phoenix. The initial media frenzy had died down, though reporters still called regularly. The FBI had seized the aircraft and the money, cordoned off the entire airfield as a crime scene. His $10,000 investment was gone, absorbed into evidence that might not be released for years. But the reward money was real. The paperwork had been filed. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that Marcus would receive the full $6 million once the case was formally closed. It wasn't the fortune hidden in that aircraft, but it was more money than he'd ever dreamed of having. More importantly, he was alive. Louis was safe. Diane had stopped having nightmares about men coming for her grandson. They'd survived. Vincent helped him hire a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in whistleblower cases and federal negotiations. Patricia walked Marcus through the legal maze, explaining what he could and couldn't say, what rights he had, what obligations. She also helped Marcus set up a trust for the reward money, protecting it from taxes and creditors, and anyone else who might come looking. $6 million is life-changing, Patricia said during one of their meetings. But it's also complicated. You'll have people asking for money, investment opportunities that sound too good to be true, family members with sudden emergencies. You need to be smart about this. Marcus had already been thinking about it. Late nights in the cabin, unable to sleep, he'd made lists of what he wanted to do, how he wanted to live, what kind of future he wanted to build for Louis. He didn't want a mansion or a luxury car or any of the things people associated with sudden wealth. He wanted security. He wanted education. He wanted to make sure Louis never had to worry about money the way Marcus had worried his entire adult life. But he also wanted something more, something meaningful. The aircraft might be gone, but the story remained. Marcus Wellington, single father and mechanic, had uncovered one of the biggest unsolved heists in federal history. That story had power. It had opened doors he never knew existed. 3 months after the discovery, Marcus received a call from a documentary production company. They wanted to tell his story, the full story, from the auction to the threats to the resolution. They offered him creative control and a percentage of the profits. He almost said no. The attention had been overwhelming, invasive, frightening at times. But then he thought about all the single fathers out there working multiple jobs, struggling to survive, told they couldn't dream bigger than their circumstances. He thought about people in male-dominated industries, fighting for respect and recognition. He thought about Louis, watching his father navigate impossible situations with nothing but courage and determination. Yes, Marcus told them. But I have conditions. The documentary premiered 9 months later. Phantom Bird, the hidden fortune, told Marcus's story honestly, including the fear, the mistakes, the moments he'd wanted to give up. But it also told a bigger story about corruption, about ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, about having the courage to do the right thing even when it's terrifying. The response was overwhelming. Marcus did interviews with major news outlets, spoke at conferences about diversity in aviation, was invited to testify before Congress about FBI oversight and whistleblower protections. He hated the attention but used the platform to talk about things that mattered. Inequality in the aviation industry, the struggles of single parents, the importance of second chances. The reward money came through 18 months after the initial discovery. $6 million minus taxes and legal fees left him with just over $3.5 million. It was more money than Marcus had ever imagined having, and he approached it with the same careful precision he'd once used to rebuild aircraft engines. He paid off every debt he had. He bought a modest house in a good school district. Nothing flashy, just a place with a yard where Louis could play and enough space that they didn't feel cramped. He set up a college fund for Louis that would cover any university in the country. He gave Diane enough money to retire comfortably, to stop worrying about bills for the first time in her life. And then Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He started a scholarship fund for people pursuing careers in aviation mechanics. The Marcus Wellington Foundation provided full tuition, tools, and mentorship for individuals who wanted to work on aircraft but couldn't afford the training. My wife used to say that opportunities don't knock. You have to build the door they can walk through, Marcus said at the Foundation's launch event. This is me building doors for people who look like me, who come from where I came from, who think the aviation industry isn't for people like us. You belong here, and I'm going to prove it. The first year, they funded 12 scholarships. By the third year, it was 50. Young people from all over the country applied, sharing stories that sounded heartbreakingly familiar to Marcus. Single parents, children of immigrants, people who'd been told they weren't strong enough or smart enough or welcome enough to work on aircraft. Marcus interviewed every applicant personally. He saw himself in their eyes, in their determination, in their refusal to accept that their circumstances defined their potential, and he gave them what no one had given him, a real chance. One of the scholarship recipients was a 19-year-old named Tell who'd grown up in foster care and had been working at a fast food restaurant to save money for community college. Marcus met him at the Foundation office, a small space they'd rented in a hangar at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. "Why aviation?" Marcus asked him. Tell's eyes lit up. "When I was 12, I was on a flight to see my foster family for the first time. I was so scared. Didn't know what was waiting for me. Didn't know if they'd be kind. But when we took off, when I felt that aircraft lift into the sky, I thought, whoever built this, whoever takes care of this, they're doing something important. I wanted to be part of that." Marcus approved his scholarship on the spot. The foundation grew beyond scholarships. They partnered with high schools to create aviation programs, bringing aircraft into schools where kids could see them up close, touch them, understand them. They funded internships at maintenance facilities, creating pipelines for young people to enter the industry. They lobbied for policy changes, for better parental leave in aviation jobs, for protections against harassment and discrimination. Louis, now 11 years old, became the unofficial mascot of the foundation. He'd grown up around aircraft, learned to identify every commercial airliner by sight, could explain how jet engines worked with the casual expertise of someone who'd been absorbing this information his entire life. He still wanted to be a pilot, and Marcus had no doubt he would be. "Dad," Louis said one evening as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset. "Do you ever wish you'd kept the money? The big money, I mean?" Marcus thought about this sometimes. "But you know what? That money wasn't mine. It was stolen from people, from taxpayers, from everyone. Keeping it would have been wrong. But you found it. I found it. But finding something doesn't make it yours, especially when it was taken from someone else." He pulled Louis closer. "The reward money, though, that's different. I earned that by doing the right thing, and that feels better than any fortune ever could." The legal fallout from Marcus's discovery continued for years. Gerald Hackett, the retired FBI supervisor, was indicted on corruption charges. Investigators found evidence he'd been paid to slow-walk the investigation, to ensure certain leads weren't followed, to protect people connected to the heist. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. 3 men connected to Eduardo Morales' former organization were arrested in Mexico and extradited to face charges. 2 of them eventually cooperated, providing details about how the heist had been planned, how the money had been moved, how the aircraft had been hidden. The mastermind, it turned out, had been a Federal Reserve employee who'd retired in 2004 and died of cancer in 2009, taking most of his secrets to the grave. The aircraft itself was eventually released from evidence and auctioned again, this time by the U.S. Marshal Service. Marcus didn't bid. He'd learned his lesson about mysterious aircraft and hidden fortunes, but he watched the auction results online, curious. It sold for $850,000 to an aviation museum that planned to restore it and display it as part of an exhibit on crime and punishment. Marcus was invited to the museum's opening. He stood in front of the aircraft, now cleaned and polished, with informational placards explaining its history. Visitors walked around it taking pictures, reading about the heist, about the discovery, about the single father who'd risked everything to do the right thing. "It's strange seeing it like this," Vincent said, standing beside him. He'd become a close family friend over the years, joining them for holidays, teaching Louis about investigation techniques, being the uncle he'd never had. "It doesn't look scary anymore," Marcus said. "Just sad. Think about all the lives it touched. The people who planned the heist, the ones who hid the money, Eduardo Morales and everyone who died in that cartel war, Agent Bradley who spent years chasing the truth, all for money that's just sitting in a government warehouse somewhere now." "Not all of it," Vincent reminded him. $6 million of it is building doors for people who need them." Marcus smiled. "Yeah, I guess that's something." 5 years after the discovery, Marcus was invited to speak at a Diversity in Aviation conference in Seattle, the keynote address in front of 3,000 people, most of them young professionals starting their careers or fighting to advance in an industry that still didn't always welcome them. Marcus stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces and felt his old fear of public speaking trying to resurface. But then he saw Louis in the front row, now 13 and already taller than his father, giving him a thumbs up. Diane sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue because she cried at everything now that her son was famous. "When I bought that aircraft," Marcus began, "I thought I was making a smart investment. Turns out I was walking into the biggest nightmare of my life. I was threatened, followed, told that people I loved would be hurt if I didn't stay quiet. There were days I wished I'd never gone to that auction, never opened that compartment, never found what was hidden inside." He paused, letting the weight of that honesty settle over the audience. "But here's what I learned. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good. Sometimes it's terrifying. Sometimes it costs you everything you thought you wanted. But you do it anyway because the alternative, staying silent, protecting yourself at the expense of truth, that costs even more. It costs your integrity, your self-respect, your ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know you're someone your children can be proud of." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I'm not special. I'm not brave. I'm just a mechanic from Phoenix who got lucky and who had people around him willing to help when things got hard. What I want you to take away from my story isn't that you should go looking for hidden fortunes or exposing massive conspiracies. What I want you to understand is that you have more power than you think. Your voice matters. Your choices matter. And when you use that power, when you speak up, even when you're afraid, you can change not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you." He looked directly at the young people in the front rows, at the scholarship recipients from his foundation, at all the future mechanics and engineers and pilots who'd been told they didn't belong. "Build the doors, walk through them, and then hold them open for the next person coming behind you. That's how we change the world. Not with grand gestures or perfect plans, but with small acts of courage repeated over and over until they become something unstoppable." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Marcus stood at the podium, overwhelmed, grateful, still a little uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding now why it mattered. His story wasn't just about finding money. That night, back in their hotel room, Louis sat on the bed doing homework while Marcus answered emails. Most were congratulatory messages about the speech. A few were from young people asking for advice. One was from Jennifer Cruz, the reporter who'd first broken the story, now working on a book about the case. "Dad," Louis said, looking up from his math textbook. "When I'm a pilot, I'm going to name my first aircraft after you. Marcus laughed. You don't name aircraft, buddy. The airlines do that. Then I'll buy my own aircraft and name it whatever I want. With what money? Louis grinned. The money I'll make being an amazing pilot who everyone wants to hire because I'm Marcus Wellington's son and he taught me to never give up. Marcus set down his phone and moved to sit beside Louis on the bed. You know you don't have to be defined by me, right? You can be your own person, make your own choices, build your own life. I know, Louis said, but you're a pretty good example to follow. You found a fortune and gave it away to help other people. That's like superhero level cool. I didn't give it away. I used it wisely. Same thing. Louis returned to his homework, then added quietly. Mom would be proud of you. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Yeah, buddy. I think she would be. He thought about Rachel often, especially in moments like this, wondered what she'd think of the man he'd become, of the life he'd built, of the son they'd raised together for far too short a time. She died chasing her dreams. And for years, Marcus had been angry about that, had seen it as selfish and reckless. But he understood now. She hadn't died because she was careless. She died because she'd refused to live small, refused to accept limitations, refused to believe that people like them couldn't reach for the sky. And in her own way, she'd taught Marcus to do the same. The aircraft had been his test, his moment to choose between safety and courage. And he'd chosen courage, not because he was fearless, but because he had something worth being brave for, a son who needed to see that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, that single fathers from Phoenix could stand up to powerful men and win, that finding your wings sometimes meant walking through fire first. 10 years after the discovery, Marcus stood in the hangar where the Foundation now had its headquarters. They'd expanded significantly, now funding over 200 scholarships annually, partnering with airlines and maintenance facilities across the country, running mentorship programs and advocacy campaigns. The walls were covered with pictures of scholarship recipients, people of every age and background, all of them learning to build and maintain and believe in aircraft the same way Marcus once had. Louis was 21 now, finishing his commercial pilot's license, already hired by a regional airline. He'd come by the hangar that morning to show Marcus his new uniform, beaming with pride. How does it feel? Marcus had asked. Like everything you and Mom ever dreamed for me, Louis replied. Diane had passed away the year before, peacefully in her sleep. Her last years comfortable and happy thanks to the reward money. At her funeral, she'd been remembered as a woman who'd raised 7 children, buried 1 husband and 1 daughter-in-law, and lived to see her grandson become a pilot and her son become a hero. Marcus didn't feel like a hero. Most days, he still felt like that frightened man standing in a desert salvage yard, making a reckless bid on an aircraft he couldn't afford. But he'd learned that heroism wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. He walked through the hangar, past the training aircraft the Foundation now owned, past the classrooms where young people learned to read schematics and use tools and trust their own capabilities. He thought about the $9,000 he'd spent on a 737 full of secrets, about the $324 million he'd found and given back, about the $6 million reward that had changed everything. But the real fortune hadn't been in the money. It had been in the choice. In the decision to do the right thing, even when it was terrifying. In the doors that choice had opened. In the lives it had touched, in the legacy he was building. Anyone can find treasure if they're willing to look in forgotten places, but it takes real courage to decide what to do with it once you've found it. Marcus Wellington had found a fortune hidden in an abandoned aircraft. But what he built with that discovery, a foundation, a movement, a future for people who needed someone to believe in them, that was worth more than all the money in the world. As the sun set over Phoenix, painting the hangar in shades of orange and gold, Marcus Wellington stood in the space he'd created and knew that he'd finally done what Rachel had always said was important. He'd built a door that opportunities could walk through. and he'd held it open for every person brave enough to follow. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories that will move you. Click now to discover them. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they find the courage to stand up for what's right.